Hello, everyone. How are you? Welcome to the discussion of the Post-and-Courier's The Greenland Connection, Climate Change from Greenland to Charleston by Senior Projects Reporter Tony Bartlemy and photojournalist Lauren Petracca. My name is Natalie Hauff, and I am the Deputy Director of Innovation here at Charleston County Public Library. I was fortunate enough to work with them at the Post-and-Courier before I moved over to library land, so I'm so excited about being here tonight. We just ask that you please wear your mask during this program. And I'd like to do a special thanks to our adult coordinator with Charleston County Library, Carly Gallagher, and Main Libraries, Jackie Lyons and branch manager Leonie Martins, for helping with today's program. This is part of our efforts in teaching media literacy, and it's one of the many events that we get to partner with the Post-and-Courier. We actually have a program going on this week called Girls on the Beat, where teenage girls get to hear about the stories and successes of female journalists around the Lowcountry, including the executive editor, Autumn Phillips, and photojournalist, Grace Beam. And that's going on at the Beast Ferry West Ashley Library. So if you have any children or grandchildren who are budding journalists, please send them our way. And so first, we're gonna play a short video that summarizes this amazing and groundbreaking piece from the Post-and-Courier, and then we'll hear from executive editor of the Post-and-Courier, Autumn Phillips.
Just imagine hundreds of Grand Canyons, but instead of brown and tan rock, it's all blue and white ice. We just got back from Greenland for a project we're calling the Greenland Connection. Our flooding tides, our rising sea levels are all connected to what's happening in places that may be beyond our borders.
We need to look at what forces are at play in other parts of the world that are making it rain so hard, that are making flooding almost a common occurrence here.
One of our stories that we did a few years back was about how the Gulf Stream is slowing. A lot of the ice in Greenland is melting, and that's sending a big slug of fresh water into these ocean currents that drive the Gulf Stream. So we kept on hearing about Greenland in the course of our reporting, and it became clear that we needed to study that country more closely. Greenland has so much ice that it actually has gravitational pull like a mini moon. And it pulls the ocean, just like the moon pulls the ocean, toward it. And that raises the sea level near Greenland, but it actually lowers our sea level. It pulls the water away from our coast. Now what happens is when that ice melts, that gravity in that ice disperses. And so that gravitational pull decreases. And that means the oceans sort of slosh back and raising our sea levels.
While you're there, you just hear this constant thunder. But it's not actually thunder, it's the ice breaking off and into the water.
Imagine an iceberg the size of an aircraft carrier doing a somersault. There were so many just gigantic icebergs moving, floating by. You could actually see them, and then to hear the ice crack and it sound like thunder.
One thing that I really wanted to show in my images is how big these pieces of ice are. It is so vast. Going and seeing rivers of meltwater up there and lakes of blue water, it was beautiful, but it's also a reminder that this place is melting.
I hope our readers get a sense of how urgent the situation is, that the forces affecting us are huge. Why go all the way to Greenland? Couldn't we do it in an easier way by making phone calls or just sending emails? Well, if you do that, you really don't get a sense of the place. You really can't talk about it in an honest and authentic way. You have to go out there, you have to go look at the icebergs, you have to put your feet on top of the ice sheet to really get a sense as to what's really happening. We were able to do this trip in part because of generous support by the Pulitzer Center and the Fund for Investigative Journalism. But more and more, our stories are really directly supported by readers through their digital subscriptions. So if you subscribe to our paper, you are more than ever directly supporting this kind of investigative reporting.
When somebody opens up the newspaper on Sunday morning when the story comes out, I hope that they look at the photographs, read the story, and I hope that they feel connected to a place that maybe they never knew they had a connection to.
right, welcome. I'm Autumn Phillips, editor of the Post and Courier. Uh, Natalie just mentioned the girls on the beat. I was just out at the Bees Ferry Library talking to some girls about journalism, and I was describing what it feels like to cover flooding. You know, that moment getting up at, it's 6:30 in the morning, all of a sudden you realize all of downtown is flooding. You throw on your hat, throw on your waders, get out there, walk through what we know now is disgusting floodwaters, sample, take notes, call back, take photos. Anyway, and then I hop in my truck and I drive over here and it's pouring rain. I don't know if it was pouring rain downtown. Drive through Lockwood, medical district, get here. Anyway, so this feels very fitting. This project is a continuation of something we've been doing a couple years called Rising Waters, where we are focused on the pace of climate change and how it's affecting sea rise here and how that is affecting our quality of life here in Charleston. This was obviously very ambitious to send a reporter and a photographer to Greenland for weeks. I'm excited to share it with you. And as Tony said in the video, this was funded by 2 grants and generous donations from readers. So if anyone here is a donor, thank you very much. And if you're a subscriber, thank you very much. Glenn Smith, our Watchdog editor, is going to be our moderator tonight, interviewing Lauren Petraka, a photographer, and Tony Bartlemy, our senior projects reporter.
Thanks, Autumn. Much appreciated. As Autumn said, I'm Glenn Smith. I'm the Watchdog Public Service editor. I was the editor on this project, which basically means that they got to go and do all this really cool stuff, and then I helped them put it together and make it look really cool when they came back. It's a really intense project, really great project, and it was a lot of fun to work on, and really pleased with the result. Tony, this was something that you had talked about doing for years and years and years. For many years, I sat across from Tony in the newsroom, and I can attest to the fact that every year he would be like, why don't we go to Greenland? Why don't we go to Greenland? And there was some skepticism at first about the expenditure and how it would connect here in Charleston. And Tony had a very solid explanation for why it should matter to folks here. Tell us how you're able to sell this thing, make it a reality, and also cobble together the resources to make this thing happen.
Yeah, thank you, Glenn, and thank you all for braving the latest torrential storm to hear us. So, yeah, why send 2 journalists from the Post and Courier 3,000 miles north to Greenland for a local newspaper story? Well, the story behind the story really is, truth be told, it kind of began as a joke. I was working on this project 3 years ago about the Gulf Stream, called Into the Gulf Stream. And as you know, the Gulf Stream flows off our coast, but it flows with such force and velocity that it actually draws the water away from our coast, lowering our sea level. In fact, without the Gulf Stream, our sea level would be 3 feet higher. And so, as you know, the Gulf Stream also flows north along the East Coast and up toward Greenland. This warm and dense, salty water from the tropics begins to sink as it cools, and it sinks down to the bottom of the ocean and then flows south in another current that eventually connects with the Gulf Stream again. So it creates this great conveyor belt. Now, the problem is all this ice in Greenland is melting, and it's sending that big slug of fresh water toward this conveyor belt, slowing it down. And so is this really real? So in 2009, this conveyor belt slowed by 15%, and seas rose in New England 5 inches for about a year. And it flooded here as well. So I was really interested. I was doing that story in the summer, and I'm from Minnesota, right? So I don't really like the heat. And so I would turn to Glenn and say, Glenn, what we really need to do is go to Greenland. And he would roll his eyes, and everybody would roll their eyes. But the more I thought about it, and the more I learned about the Gulf Stream, and the more I learned about this gravitational effect that we described in our story, the more I realized that Greenland really is perhaps the most important factor in Charleston's long-term viability. So we really need to understand what's happening there if we want to know what's going to happen here. And so we started making plans to go to Greenland. It's really expensive. I can talk about that a little later. And we got a couple of grants, and then we had made plans to go in 2020. Well, Greenland shut its borders down for everybody until earlier this year. There was a tiny window where they started letting people in. And so we slipped through that door and we managed to bring the story home without contracting any COVID. And yes, I did get out of the heat for the summer. So
The most important thing.
exactly.
Hey, Lauren, what intrigued you the most about being part of this mission, and what are some of the early obstacles you encountered before you got there?
Yeah. When I found out that when I was asked if I wanted to go to Greenland with Tony, it was in 2020, and it was 2 weeks before we thought we were going. So it was like, do you want to go to Greenland? Like, yes, but I just had no time to really process it. So when it didn't happen, the whole next year I was just wishing and hoping that it would happen. And you know, I went to school for photojournalism, and one of the reasons that I went to school for it and stayed in it when I was in school was because of environmental reasons. I really wanted to tell environmental stories in the future. So when I found out that we'd be working on this story, it was really like my dream. So that was just an amazing opportunity. I never thought that I was going to get to go to Greenland, let alone for a local newspaper in Charleston, South Carolina. So that was really amazing. But this year, my passport expired in April, and I knew that the trip might be coming up in August, or I assumed it would be later in the summer if it did happen, if they opened up their borders. So I sent in my passport to be renewed. And then May went by, June went by, it got to beginning of July, and I was like, okay, where's my passport? Because at the time it said it was going to take 4 to 6 weeks. So I did a little research, I Googled, and all the headlines were pretty much saying that if you wanted to renew your passport, it was impossible, and it was going to take like 18 weeks. So I reached out to Tim Scott's office and Nancy Mace's office, and 2 people who work there were amazing, and they were able to get me my passport 3 days before the trip. So it was very stressful, but really glad that it worked out.
Okay. Tony, after so many years of anticipation about getting there, what were the initial impressions like? What struck you the most about Greenland when you got there and are in the presence of these immense glaciers, and anything that surprised you about what you saw?
Yeah, so you see a place in pictures, I don't know, it's not the same, and I remember we landed at the airport in this town called Ilulissat, and we were taking a taxi into town, and we were driving on this windy road, and off in the distance we could see the town, and then beyond that were these giant icebergs, and just the sheer size of them surprised me. And I really felt kind of emotional when I saw them, and I don't kind of get emotional about a lot of things. So, so I was just sitting there, just wow, these are huge, and that really became kind of a defining theme was the size of the icebergs, the just the size of the forces affecting them, and just the stakes overall.
I actually remember flying in. I think you were like maybe asleep on the plane, and I saw the first patch of ice. I was like, Tony, there's ice. Yeah. And we looked out the window and we saw like a couple patches of ice. We're like, oh my gosh. And then when we flew closer, it was just all this ice. It was amazing.
There's something about flying over it and then being on the ground. I don't know. They're both amazing experiences, but just seeing this giant, just looking up at things, it does something to you.
Okay. So, Tony, you land, you're ready to go with a pen and a pad of paper. Lauren, you've got a little bit more to deal with, a lot of heavy equipment to drag around. Talk a little bit about navigating this giant ice field and these dangerous terrains with all that gear, and tell us a little bit about the drone that got away.
So I've never been on a work trip this long, so packing was very interesting, especially because I didn't know what weather to expect. So I managed to pack everything in a little suitcase that carries my photo equipment, a backpack, a really big backpacking backpack, and another backpack. So I tried to be as nimble as possible, but that's not that easy when you have so much photo gear. But on days like this, when we hiked to the ice cap, I really wanted to bring just what I needed. I didn't know what to expect when we were going out here. So I just put a camera around my neck. Usually I carry 2 cameras on each arm, one with a zoom lens, one with a wide angle. And this day I was like, I'm going to have Tony carry one in his backpack and I'll carry the other one. And I didn't even end up getting the one out of Tony's backpack, sorry. But it was just so, we have these crampons on, we have hiking poles. Usually I'm used to being able, I see something, I see a moment happen and I take a picture. But in this scenario, it was really hard to just stop and take a picture because there's hiking poles around my wrists and there's cliffs on the sides of you. And our guide, he said, if you want to stop and take a picture, someone has to hold on to your backpack so you don't fall. So it was just really different. And really, the thing I was surprised about by the trip was that I kind of expected you'd be in town and you would just see ice all around you. It'd be really easy to photograph, but that wasn't the case. While you could see it off in the distance, in order to get a good picture, you really had to hike. So several days, Tony and I would hike for hours to get out towards the ice. Otherwise, you had to take a boat or get on a plane to see it. So it wasn't super accessible. So being able to carry my equipment with me was really important.
So what happened to that drone?
Oh, gosh. I don't like telling this story. I've been flying drones for almost 3 years, and I've never crashed one. And I was saying that the whole trip. I was super confident. And then we went out on a boat to this glacier where it's calving, and I thought I was going to get this great footage. And I had to launch out of the boat, and I don't really want to tell the story. It's so embarrassing. But my drone went up, and it pretty much has sensors on it. So it senses if there's obstacles, and it sensed the boat, and it just fell right into the water. And that water is ice cold, and there was no going in after it. So Tony likes to say he saw the bubbles as it went down, and it was really sad. And then the saddest part wasn't just losing the drone, but it was the video I thought I was going to come away with and the photos from the trip, and just that was the first time I tried to launch it there. So knowing that I wasn't going to get that angle was really upsetting. I actually was I almost bought my own drone out there, but didn't end up doing it.
Yeah, so it's got to change the way you approach the assignment, though, right? You probably were thinking, I'm going to fly this thing over all the glaciers and get all this really cool footage. And how did you sort of work around that and come up with the great images that you did? And was it more difficult? What was more difficult, hiking across this chasm here, or explaining to our photo editor what happened to the drone when you got back?
I thought it was going to be the second part, but he was actually very nice about it. Thank you, Matthew. What was the first question?
Just how did it change your approach to the assignment? Not having that at your ready.
Yeah, I was really planning to make this beautiful video with just aerials and smooth footage, and I just did a lot of complaining to Tony the whole week about I don't know what to do, and ended up figuring it out. We went out on a flight with NASA, which was incredible. And the scientist was super well spoken, so I did an interview with him, and it was so good. And it just kind of I was like, okay, I'm going to base my video off of him. So I ended up spending a little extra time with him and changing the video to being more about that. And photographs, it was okay because we did aerial flights, so I was able to get images from that perspective.
And Lauren's being a little modest about the challenges of taking pictures, because just look at, she's on ice, those are metal crampons that prevent you from falling. That's a nice little river, meltwater river, not too dangerous, but we were walking over these chasms that were you look down and you couldn't see the bottom, as if our guy, we had a guide too, and he didn't seem to think that was a big deal. But one slip and you're gone. And she's carrying all this, stuff on her back.
Yeah, there's actually, it's really sad. There have been scientists who've gone out in the past couple of years to put out instruments to measure climate change and just never came back. People say that they fell through the cracks in the ice. So it's really dangerous out there. You have to go with a guide pretty much.
And this picture up here is, I think, really sort of demonstrates a lot of things too. One, you can see a little bit of how it's melting. We went on the ice sheet on a day when it was, I don't know, maybe in the 50s, maybe something like 50 or so, and it was raining during part of it. And then you can also see that little black sort of tinge. Well, that's actually soot and dust from wildfires, and even the little dust that comes from our tires as they wear down and kind of get swept up by the winds and then end up on the ice. And that makes the ice melt faster because, of course, black colors absorb heat. So all that was, very surprising for me to see that it wasn't just, so it was white and blue and also a little black in a lot of spots.
So seeing this ice melt and the calving and all up close, what concerned you most for the future of Greenland and also for us back here in Charleston? What does all this portend for our future?
Yeah, so the ice is melting so rapidly in some areas that you have these giant ice cubes, essentially a bunch of ice cubes dropping into a cocktail, and it's raising the sea level as that happens. And then also, as I described, this gravitational effect is also playing a really big role in our area. And I'll explain it really quickly. There's 80% of Greenland is ice, and that ice is 5,000 feet thick, and that ice is as big as Mexico. So just imagine that ice bag that you carry out of the Walgreens and how heavy that is, and then imagine something 5,000 feet thick. So that has mass, and that mass has gravity, and that pulls the ocean toward Greenland and pulls it away, kind of like the Gulf Stream, pulls it away from our beaches. So as that ice melts, that gravity, it locked in that ice, disperses as well, and then our seas sort of slosh back. So you add up, the Gulf Stream, you add up that gravitational effect, you add up just that simple whiskey drink effect of rising water, then you have the reason why our streets are flooding more often than they used to.
And with that accelerating, what do you think this is going to mean in the years to come here?
Yeah, so our sea level rose for decades at about an inch every decade. Not really a big deal. Then in the 90s, it started accelerating a lot. It started going up about 1.5 inches, and then the 2000s is about 2.5 inches. It's going up at about 3 inches a decade now. After that, it's 4 inches and 5 inches. So that's a cumulative effect, which may not seem like a lot, right? But a foot, if seas rise a foot in Charleston County, 64,000 acres that didn't flood will see water when there are super high tides. And it'll affect 1,000 buildings in Charleston County alone. So it's that rapid. It's, a lot of people say, oh, the climate's always changed. And, they're right. But the climate hasn't changed as rapidly as it is now. That's the pace of change that's really the issue.
That's really what we found during Rising Waters, right? We got into this thing, we're trying to look at all the factors behind it, and really the thing that caught our eye the most, I think, was the acceleration in the climate change, and that became the story, right? Just how often we're dealing with these flooding events. Can you talk slightly about that too? Just like how often we're seeing increased tidal flooding and some of these other
so climate change, forget about the future, right? We don't think too well about the future. Our brains are wired to respond to immediate threats that are in front of us. The brain is a great get-out-of-the-way machine, a philosopher once said. So what's in our way? So we are seeing flooding now in Charleston 60 to 80 times a year, where that would happen, 2 or 3 times a year 40 or 50 years ago. So I think that's maybe the biggest thing. We're seeing stuff now, and it's incremental, so it doesn't seem like a big deal, but over suddenly, you realize, oh yeah, it is flooding 60 times a year now. That's different.
So the story focused a lot on the science behind Greenland's climate emergency, but while you're there, you were able to get a real taste and sense of the culture and the people of Greenland too. Can you talk a little bit about that, Lauren, and sort of what a few of the takeaways you had?
Yeah, the Greenlandic culture is amazing, and I didn't know too much about the country before we went. So, since I've been back, when I tell people I went to Greenland, they ask, like, do people live there? And honestly, I didn't know too much about it before I went. But I think the population is 56,000 people in the whole country. And in Ilulissat, where we spent a lot of time, the population is about 5,000. And it's, it's just unlike any place I've ever been. The people there are so dependent on the land still, which, it's kind of just more in your face of how connected people are to their surroundings there. Like, we're connected to our surroundings. We still need land for food, but we don't actually have to physically go hunt for it or go fishing for it. And people there still are doing that. So it was just really amazing to see their way of life, and it's really difficult. Usually when I travel places, my dad always jokes, because I'll call him when I get back. I'm like, oh, I want to move here. And I would love to live in Greenland, but I don't think I could do it. It's a lot of work. But yeah.
So the big thing in Greenland is a big industry is fishing, and halibut is a really lucrative fish to catch. So they make a lot of money fishing for halibut. They also hunt for seal. They hunt seals. That's another source of food. But they also, there's a really nice grocery store there, but it's one or two. And then they all have sled dogs, and maybe Lauren can talk a little bit about the sled dogs.
Yeah, I was really intrigued by the sled dogs. Sled dogs are kept outside of town. It smells really bad. So you're walking out to these hiking trails, and you'll pass these fields of like hundreds of dogs, and they're all chained up, and they have their own little houses with their names on them. One dog we saw was named Trump. It's a different way of life, like I said. So their dogs to them are really tools. It's not pets. And so, this is kind of sad, but we found out that on Wednesdays, if a dog is loose, they can be pretty dangerous. So on Wednesdays, there's a guy who goes and he actually shoots the dogs that are loose. But the culture is amazing with sled dogs, and it's being lost, and actually in part due to climate change, because in the winters, people will take out their sled dogs to fish, and they'll take them out on the ice, but the ice is actually becoming so thin that now they're able to take out their boats. And so the sled dog population in the last decade has actually decreased by 50%. And people are really afraid of losing that as part of their culture. And they think that the thing that might actually save it is tourism now, because a lot of tourists travel there and they want to ride sled dogs as the experience. So that's a big reason why people still keep them.
One of the things that surprised me was, you would think that they would, that the folks in Greenland would hate the winter, but they actually need the ice. That's how they go out onto the ice and they ice fish. And as one fisherman told us, he said, without any ice, there's no money.
Yeah.
So one of the cool things that you did, and you went into this project with, was also wanting to connect not only the science again of what's happening there to what's happening here, but also how our cultures, though different, there's some similarities, right, between the topography and also the cultures, and we have many things apart, but a lot of things in common. Can you explain a little bit like your approach to how you illustrated that and why you wanted to do that?
Yeah, so I think some of the images are up here, and you probably saw them in print, but when I first found out we were going to Greenland, I knew that sometimes it's hard to make people care about something that's so far away. And I really wanted to make people feel that they have something in common with the people there, with the landscape there. And so many articles that I would look up, by other newspapers when I was researching for this story were just pictures of ice. And while I knew I was going to get some of that, I really wanted to look a little deeper and see what similarities we had. So when I was researching, I saw that, fishing is big there. They have shrimping, tourism is big. And I just saw a lot of parallels between Charleston and Greenland. So before we even went, I started to visually try and explore that. So I went out to Botany Bay because I knew that, erosion is a big problem there because of sea level rise. Took some pictures there. I just really went out and tried to explore people's relationship with water here. And I went in hoping that I would be able to pair it with an image from Greenland, but I didn't necessarily take pictures in Greenland to try and pair them up. But then when I got back, I looked through the photos I had from Charleston and the photos I had in Greenland, and I was like, wow, like these really go together. And so I kind of ended up pairing them that way. So you'll see some of those out there.
I remember when you were planning this trip too, you were going to go to the one region that I can never seem to pronounce that had the glacier with the most melt, and then you were going to go to this NASA base. And I was fascinated how you were able to hook up with that crew from here and to plan that out. And I remember as you went into this, Lauren was like, oh man, he's going to take me to this place. There's nothing there but an airstrip. He's going to be like totally gorging on the science, and I'm going to have nothing to do. I'm going to have to but you ended up finding it like a fascinating part of the trip.
Like my favorite place.
What was so neat about that crew and that whole experience and the whole Elvis impersonator who led that crew?
So first of all, it's important to know that the Greenlandic is one of the languages of Greenland, and it's its own language. It produced words like igloo and kayak, and it produced words that are incredibly long, 153 letters in one case. And I can't pronounce any of the cities, and Lauren's really good at it, so I'm going to mispronounce everything, and she'll correct me. But so we went to this town called Kangerlussuaq.
I can't pronounce it. I try, but it's like really like Gangershuswash.
All right, so it's Conger something or other, and it's an old abandoned military base, U.S. military base, and we landed, and it's as if it was abandoned almost, and it looked terrible and dry, and Lauren was already complaining, oh, we got to get out of here, but no, we're gonna meet these NASA guys, it'll be awesome.
And you booked the hotel that was like really far, the only thing far away from there.
I booked a hotel that was that looked like it, a bunch of meth addicts were hanging out of, and so we're sitting there, we don't know what we're doing, but we ended up hooking up with these NASA scientists who were flying around Greenland, dropping essentially very fancy thermometers into the ocean, measuring how warm the water was from the surface to the bottom. And so basically they were just throwing them out of airplanes. And so the reason I really wanted to do that was I knew one of the scientists. I'd gotten to know him over the last couple of years, and he was an Elvis impersonator. And I thought, okay, that's too good to pass up. And from a storytelling standpoint, it's really hard to write about science, period. And so you really need these vehicles to tell that story, and often it's a character, an interesting character. And he was a character, and he was a scientist who spoke English, and not just English. He could speak English that I could understand. And so we spent a lot of time with these guys, and they were just fantastic.
Yeah, you just touched on something really there. I mean, you've kind of made a name for yourself writing these really intensely complicated stories about science in recent years, from the ghost bird, this bird that nobody ever sees, to the Gulf Stream and the rising waters and the stuff we did up in the Delta as well. It's really tough concepts, a lot of this stuff. How do you break it down in a way that makes it not only informative to people and easy to understand, but also entertaining as well?
Yeah, so a lot of a story, a story is really a collection of stories. Usually, it's almost like a string of pearls. Each pearl is an anecdote, and if you're doing your job right, you're stringing these pearls in a way that leads to some sort of deeper thought, and so I'm always looking for these characters to help me tell the story, and then also create the kind of context around these characters, because that's what people like. People like personal stories amid these sort of larger, high-stakes events, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. And so I try to look for those kind of the context, so I can kind of describe it really well, and that really helps to go there. You can't do it over the phone. And then find these great characters who will help me out, help me tell the story. And without them, I really then I flounder around, and it's really hard to write a story that people learn from, because ultimately that's what stories are about. It's how we learn. How we learn how to manage our lives better, make better decisions, from the Bible to Bruce Springsteen.
But you're right. I mean, each story should have the context to it, but also these broader the broader themes. But also, it's got to be interesting, right? I mean, if it's just a load of numbers and facts coming at you, a blizzard of information, it could be kind of dense, right? I mean, it's...
Yeah. So I try to compare things, just try to wrap my mind around it. And so I also depend on these metaphors, like the whiskey drink, that's how the ocean is rising, that's... any way you can kind of connect it with our own daily experiences, you're doing a job as a writer.
What's the most interesting thing you had to eat over there, or what was the most interesting experience you had?
So it was an interesting experience. I actually gave up eating meat and dairy about 4 years ago for environmental reasons. And so eating in Greenland is not very easy if you don't eat those things. The food, there are vegetables, but they're all frozen because they can't grow their own vegetables. And it's very meat-centric. So I ate a lot of fish. I brought some dairy enzyme pills that I could take to digest dairy because I knew I wasn't going to be able to avoid it. But I did not eat any meat. But Tony got to eat some muskox.
So muskox, really good. You wouldn't think reindeer? Nah. Sorry, vegetarians.
But it is very expensive. So to put it in perspective, a beer with dinner, a beer is $15, and that's the cheapest you'll get. Meals were like, I don't know, $30 to $40.
Oh, easily, yeah. With a box of cereal, $10. Everything was 3 times as expensive as it is here, and
we did a lot of cooking. We had an Airbnb for half of the trip, and we did a lot of cooking in the kitchen. Really sad dinners.
Terrible dinners. Muskox, highly recommend it.
So you're basically in this place, right, where you said the population of, say, Goose Creek in the size of a area that's like, 3 Texases, something like that. It's this huge place. How do you get around there? I mean, it's not like you just rent a car, right, and go bopping from one city to the next.
No. So all the towns they're kind of ring around the country, and there are literally no roads between any towns. So you either have to take a boat, or you have to find a plane or a helicopter, and so we actually had to fly between towns, and it's logistically maybe one of the most difficult places I've ever been, just to get around.
And then in towns, it was really interesting because the towns are so small and they're kind of locked in by the ice and rock. It's very rocky. So in Ilulissat, where we stayed for a while, I think they said there were only 26 kilometers of road there. But one guy laughed and he said one guy drives a Porsche, and it's really funny because you just can't drive it anywhere. Around town we would get rides in taxis, or we walked almost everywhere. And then in Kangerlussuaq, a lot of times our hotel, like I said, we landed at the airport thinking the hotel was going to be right there, And it was really actually like a mile and a half away, and it was just a dirt road straight away to where we were staying, and we would be walking down it with groceries looking really sad, and people would just stop their car and ask if we wanted to hop in, and they'd give us a ride there. And then we'd find out there's some, a pilot or a scientist or something. So the people you met there was really amazing, because there's just so many scientists and journalists. Actually, I keep saying hotel. It was really more like a hostel where we stayed.
Or like rehab.
Yeah. There was a photojournalist staying there a couple rooms down from me, and I asked for his Instagram handle. When he gave it to me, I realized he is a photojournalist I studied in college, named Paolo Pellegrin from Italy, and he's amazing. So got to hang out with him there for like 5 days, which was incredible. But yeah, the people there are all interesting.
You said too that like some of the expectations going in terms of the weather, like, oh, it must be just like, freezing there, snowing all the time. And what were some of those misconceptions, I guess, and what do you think people don't understand about Greenland?
Yeah, I don't know if it's people don't understand or I just didn't understand going into Greenland, but I didn't realize how warm it was going to be. So I packed a lot of clothing for winter time. You did too. A lot of layers. But yeah, it was, most days we were there was actually like 60 degrees, maybe high 50s. A couple days it got down to maybe like the high 40s, but it was generally very comfortable.
Believe it or not, one of the biggest problems were mosquitoes. And you wouldn't think that they were that bad, but they were as bad as the Santee Delta. And we had to wear bug nets in Greenland.
Just another Greenland connection.
There you go. Okay. I think I'm run out of questions, so I'm going to take it to the audience and go out there, I guess, with the mic and see, does anyone have any questions?
Hi, I'm Jeannie Sherrod. I've read both your Gulf Stream article and this recent article and just love them. I wanted to ask, if did that first article plant the seed of Greenland to you first?
It absolutely did. And also, I keep saying Greenville and Greenwood instead of Greenland. I don't know why. It's because of our Uncovered project, but that's a whole other story. But yeah, no, really, that's where I first started thinking about Greenland, and then this gravitational thing, which is so, people really haven't talked about that in the national media at all, because it's kind of counterintuitive and tough to explain. So that to me seemed like a really good hook to hang on.
How would you assess the people of Greenland, in their attitude about climate change and sea levels? I mean, is it more acute than ours, or is it about the same, or where is all that?
I was surprised by, it's a mix, obviously, like anywhere. But there was a picture of someone picking berries up here at one point. For example, I think he was 40 years old, and he said that when he was a kid, it was all ice, and now he's able to pick berries there. So they know it's happening, but it's maybe not so much of the science part, but climate change in general. I was surprised by how people are unconcerned with it there, for the most part. It's making their lives easier right now. So in the short term, it's warmer for them. They're not, freezing all the time. And so they kind of enjoy some things about it. And a lot of the fishermen we talked to weren't concerned about it. They're kind of just thinking about their lives right now. And like I said, there's scientists everywhere there. And they were, a little confused why scientists wanted to come here. So that was really surprising to me.
Yeah, Cliff, I would say, it's kind of like it is here. We experience climate in a very visceral way, and we don't go around saying, oh no, the climate. We can't do that all the time, and they aren't either. So a lot of them are they're noticing the changes. They'll all talk about how things are changing. What kind of label they put on it, it really depends on who they are and what they're doing.
I have 2 questions. Is one, as the ice cube falls that we saw in the picture, is new ice building behind that, or that's just not happening?
So that's a great and very nuanced question. So thank you for asking that. So what happens is, in the summer, the ice melts. You know, the giant ice cube of Greenland melts, and then during the winter, it builds back. Now, the question is, how much is it building back and how much is it melting? And in some years, it's sort of stable. But in recent years, it's been melting a lot faster. And we kind of touched on that in a little bit in the story, where these NASA scientists were out measuring things, and they found that actually the glaciers were growing, and that seemed like great news. Oh, climate change, that's not a big deal. But they also realized that it was very dependent on some certain weather patterns that eventually reversed, and the melting picked up. So, yeah. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. The second question is, if the Gulf Stream is moving and we're going to have less and less water in Charleston, wouldn't that be good for us in Charleston?
So
we'll have less of a height of water in Charleston as the Gulf Stream moves away from us.
So it's actually, the Gulf Stream isn't really moving away from us, it's slowing down. So just imagine this giant hose of water going, passing us. And if it's not going to move out, or it's just slowing down, and that momentum and that force means that force that's pulling the water toward it, so it's pulling the water toward it, is declining. So then the water just moves back.
Hi, this doesn't have anything to do with climate change, but you made me think of it when you were, because there are a lot of other questions you answered during this, and being picked up like as hitchhikers kind of and being driven home. And I'm thinking about, you said 5,600 people in the entire country.
56,000.
56,000, okay. But what's crime like? I mean, did you find that that there is crime there, or is it very easy to figure out if something happens? I'm just sort of interested to know what.
That's a funny question, and I asked that to one of a person who was running the hotel, and she said, if somebody steals something, everybody's going to know about it, so you just can't do that. Every once in a while, somebody gets drunk and they shoot somebody. There's a lot of guns and just guns and alcohol, so there's that. But overall, I felt very safe.
Very safe, yeah. Never was worried at all.
Only when she was flying the drone did I feel. Because she actually wanted me to hold the drone. Imagine just holding a drone and launching it, with these little sushi knives flying around your neck. But it went away.
One thing that I would like to explore more, though, that kind of it's not crime, but suicide is pretty an issue there, because in the wintertime it's dark for so long, and probably many other reasons, but I know that that's a big issue there.
There was a real moving story about that we learned that the women elders, it was an Inuit tradition. It's an Inuit culture. When you get too old, if you're a woman and you're not useful, you basically go to a cliff and you dive into the water because you're instantly dead.
Yeah. So just following up to what you were saying.
That's a real buzzkill, sorry.
Is it incontrovertible what you're saying, or is there a disagreement among the scientists if there's a debate?
So there's a debate about everything.
Mm-hmm.
The vast majority of scientists. So there's a debate about the Gulf Stream, and some scientists think that maybe it's not going to slow down that much. The majority of the scientists are beginning to talk about that's a real likelihood that there'll be a certain amount of slowing, and that'll have an impact. The gravitational effect, that's based on basic physics, so that's not talked about much. So yeah, I mean, there's certainly a little bit of debate here and there. When I'm saying these things, I'm saying them based on the vast majority of scientists who have done reputable studies and have verified the results over and over.
I know that Charleston has talked to people from the Netherlands about flooding and trying to learn from that. Is there any kind of collaboration now with the new information that you've brought back and with the study you did on the Gulf Stream? How is all that fitting together, or is it?
Yeah, I don't think there's any real collaboration in that regard. Lauren came up with this great idea that we should set up our own little climate change bureau up there because there's so many scientists wanting to go up there, and once they get there, they lose their drones and all that. So we thought it'd be, really cool just to hang out there and guide people. But yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I would say that there's not really right now.
Yeah, while we were up there too, I would show people the picture of the woman who's wading through floodwater here in Charleston. I took that before our trip, and I would show it to people in Greenland just to kind of explain to them why we're there doing a story, and they would say like, wow, like we've seen pictures of this in the news, and kind of what Tony was talking about before, how we don't talk about it happening, but when I would show those images to people abroad, they were shocked that people live with that. So,
2 questions. First of all, what's the berry that I was wondering what he was picking?
I don't remember the name. Okay. They call them blackberries, but they're not blackberries. They don't look like our blackberries. So I don't think we have them here. I think they do have blueberries, but the ones that he was picking was not blueberries.
Okay, and then the other one is about the soot. I'm wondering, so I think I read that it's raining like for the first time on these glaciers. So I'm just wondering, lack of snow, is that meaning that since precipitation is rain, you're uncovering the soot, which then is this cycle that it's melting even faster?
Yeah, so it's raining and snowing more than it used to, and that snow helps build up the glacier a little bit. And we were there. We happened to be there on the same day that it rained in the middle of Greenland, which is 10,000 feet high, and it had recorded there since they've been recording measurements there. It had never rained before, and it rained a lot. I think it was 700 billion gallons of water fell that day. Yeah, when the soot lands on the snow, the sun shines on the soot and it melts faster, and then the snow kind of covers that, and it's actually how they can measure layers, those layers, and make they can come up with some various scientific conclusions based on the thickness of the snow and the layers.
Well, I guess that concludes our program for tonight. I just want to thank everybody for coming out and taking such an interest in our work. I mean, you're why we do this stuff. We want to bring these stories home to you, and it's so gratifying to see the response and to see people reading. Really want to send a special thank you out to the Pulitzer Center and the Fund for Investigative Journalism. We could not have done this project without them. As Tony explained before, this is extraordinarily expensive for travel expenses, just living there and everything that went into this. And they provided us with generous grants. And I want to thank the Charleston County Library as well for hosting this and letting us bring this presentation to you. And the other cool thing is through November 8th, they're going to have an exhibit of Lauren's amazing images. So I would definitely encourage you to go check those out and to tell your friends all about that too, so they can come by and see. And finally, again, because this is so expensive, if you could see it in your heart at some point to donate to the Post and Courier Investigative Fund, that helps us do the work we do. It's funded a lot of this uncovered project we've done this year, FOIA fees and some of these things that just, officials don't want you to get access to stuff. This has provided us with some leverage to bring some of these things to light. So something to consider too. But mostly thank you for reading and for coming out tonight on a kind of a lousy night. So have a great one.
Thank you, everyone.